The United States and Europe are once again locking horns over trade and tax policies, and this time, things are heating up fast. What started as a long-standing disagreement has now snowballed into something far more serious. One that could shake up global markets, disrupt businesses, and hit consumers where it hurts. For years, both sides have pointed fingers, each claiming the other is playing unfair. But now, the tension has reached a boiling point, and tariffs have become the weapon of choice in this economic standoff. Neither side seems willing to back down, and the stakes are higher than ever. Fresh off his return to the White House, President Donald Trump has wasted no time in pushing for aggressive tax policies. His strategy? Protect American industries at all costs, even if that means stepping on some international toes. His administration's latest move, a massive 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, has sent shockwaves across Europe, leaving many wondering just how far this trade war will go. With this new policy set to kick in on Monday, businesses across the UK and Europe are bracing for impact. Steel and aluminum are essential materials for countless industries, and a sudden price hike could have a ripple effect, driving up costs and straining international partnerships. But for Trump, it's all part of his bigger plan, putting America first, no matter the fallout. The latest round of tariffs is sending shockwaves through global trade, and it's not just Europe that's feeling the heat. Mexico and Canada, two of America's closest trading partners, are now caught in the crossfire, and the ripple effects are spreading fast. For President Donald Trump, tariffs aren't just economic tools, they're weapons in a much bigger battle. He sees them as a way to pressure other countries into playing by his rules, and he's not afraid to use them to shake up long-standing trade relationships. From steel and aluminum to everyday products, his administration has slapped extra taxes on goods from nations he claims have taken advantage of the US for too long. But Trump's trade war doesn't stop there. His crackdown extends beyond economics, targeting countries for reasons that go far beyond tariffs. Colombia, for example, has been hit with penalties for refusing to accept deported migrants. And China? It's in Trump's crosshairs for everything from trade imbalances to its alleged role in the illegal drug trade. One of his most controversial moves was imposing a 10% tax on all goods coming from China. At first, smaller shipments were left out of the equation, but Trump later changed course, deciding that no imports, no matter how minor, would escape his tariff plan. The markets panicked, stocks tumbled, investors scrambled, and suddenly, the world was staring down the possibility of an all-out trade war. Here's the thing about tariffs. They sound like a punishment for foreign countries. But in reality, the cost usually lands on businesses and consumers at home. When a company in the US imports a product from another country, that tariff is added like a tax, making the item more expensive. To cover the extra cost, businesses raise their prices, which means everyday people end up paying more at the store. The idea behind tariffs is to push people to buy American-made products instead of cheaper foreign ones. In theory, this helps local businesses grow and keeps jobs in the country. But in practice, it's not always that simple. When President Trump slapped a 25% tax on foreign steel, he made one thing clear. He's determined to give American steelmakers a leg up. His goal? Make imported steel so expensive that US manufacturers have no choice but to buy from domestic producers. It's a classic case of economic protectionism, shielding local industries by making foreign competition too costly to compete. But while that might sound like a win for the steel industry, not everyone is celebrating. Businesses that rely on steel and aluminum, like car manufacturers, appliance makers, and construction companies, are bracing for higher costs. And when their expenses go up, so do the prices for everyday consumers. Outside the US, world leaders are watching closely, and many are preparing to strike back. No one more so than the European Union. Trump has never shied away from criticizing the EU, often accusing it of playing dirty in trade deals. He's especially frustrated by the massive $213 billion trade gap between the two economies, something he's called outrageous and unfair to American workers. In his mind, tariffs are the only way to balance the scales. But European officials see things very differently. They argue that the economies of the US and Europe are deeply connected, and slapping tariffs on EU exports will hurt both sides. They've strongly condemned Trump's move, calling it reckless and harmful to global trade. And if Trump thought the EU would just roll over, he was mistaken. European leaders are already considering their own set of countermeasures. Their message: if the US raises trade barriers, Europe won't hesitate to do the same. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, Trump isn't backing down. In fact, he's doubling down, even floating the idea of taxing European goods even further. His reasoning: the EU, he claims, buys far less from the US than America does from Europe, and that imbalance has gone unchecked for too long. Now he's demanding they pay their fair share. The UK, still finding its footing in a post-Brexit world, now faces a new challenge: getting caught between two economic giants in an escalating trade battle. For years, Britain has enjoyed a strong trade relationship with the US, selling everything from cars and pharmaceuticals to scientific equipment. But with President Trump's new wave of tariffs, UK officials are growing uneasy about what this could mean for their economy. Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds has been quick to argue that Britain deserves special treatment. His reasoning: the UK actually buys more from the US than it sells, which, in his view, should make it exempt from Trump's harsh trade policies. Unlike other European countries, he insists, Britain shouldn't be lumped into the same category when it comes to tariffs. Yet, despite the concerns, the UK's response has been far more measured than that of its European neighbors. Trade Secretary Douglas Alexander has urged caution, emphasizing that Britain won't jump to any rash decisions. Instead of rushing into a trade war, the government seems intent on keeping the conversation open, hoping for a deal that benefits both sides. While the UK is playing it cool, the European Union isn't holding back. Frustrated by Trump's approach, EU leaders are already fighting back, slapping tariffs on classic American exports like bourbon whiskey, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and even cranberry juice. These measures were first introduced back in 2018, when Trump launched his initial round of trade restrictions on European steel and aluminum. Though they were briefly put on pause during the Biden administration, they're now set to return in full force. Some EU officials believe their response needs to be even stronger. They're pushing for aggressive countermeasures, arguing that Europe must defend its industries at all costs. The European Commission is already weighing its options, exploring ways to hit back at the US in a way that makes an impact. Not everyone in Europe is on board with the idea of fighting fire with fire. Some leaders and economists are warning that an all-out trade war could do more harm than good for both sides. Supporters of free trade argue that in today's world, businesses rely on global supply chains to function smoothly. Many products aren't made in just one country anymore. They're assembled from parts sourced all over the world. Slapping tariffs on imports could disrupt this system, making goods more expensive and less available. A perfect example of this was seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, when researchers found that a single vaccine was the result of contributions from nearly 50 different countries. It's a reminder that the global economy is deeply connected, and messing with trade policies could have unintended consequences. But concerns go beyond just supply chains. Some economists fear that Trump's tariffs could backfire and hurt the US economy more than they help. While Trump insists that higher tariffs will lower inflation, create jobs, and boost American manufacturing, critics argue the opposite might happen. When tariffs make imports more expensive, businesses often pass those costs onto consumers. That means higher prices for everyday goods, from cars to electronics to groceries. On top of that, limiting competition could slow innovation and reduce the variety of products available in stores. Of course, there's also the possibility that Trump is using tariffs as a bargaining tool. French President Emmanuel Macron has suggested that the real economic threat to the US isn't Europe, but China. Instead of punishing European allies, he argues, America should focus its efforts on confronting China's trade practices. Macron also pointed out that if Trump wants European nations to spend more on defense, slapping tariffs on their industries isn't the best way to encourage cooperation. His foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, echoed that sentiment, warning that Europe won't sit idly by if unfair trade measures are imposed. At the heart of it all, Trump sees tariffs as a key part of his strategy, one that he believes will strengthen the US economy and force other nations to play fair. But whether this gamble will pay off remains to be seen. As tensions rise, both the US and Europe face a critical moment. Will they double down on trade restrictions and risk further economic fallout? Or will diplomatic efforts find a way to ease the standoff before things spiral out of control? Did you find this video interesting? If you did, be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.